Hi, Jonathan. Welcome back.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me on the show.
And today, I completely new topic. So I learned about Brokk with double K. So why the name? What is it?
Uh, Brokk or Brokker is the name of the Norse god of the forge. So I wanted Brokk is an AI tool for writing code, and I feel like when I'm writing code with AI, I feel like I have godlike powers, and so I wanted to reference that with the name.
That's interesting story. So I already suspected something like this because the logo looks like demon godlike, uh, yeah, creature. But recently we talk about JVector and Cassandra, and it seems like you're no more interested in vectors and Cassandras, and now you're more interested in gods and AI.
Well, there is a through line here. It's not by coincidence. So I think when we talked about my work on JVector, one of the things that really stood out to me was that uh, first of all, AI is an incredibly good complement to my skill set as an experienced programmer. So as I've gotten older, I'm 49 this year. I don't have the same energy that I had in my 20s. I can write code for I can write code for 16 hours a day, but only for like a couple days, right? I can't do it for months at a time like I could before. And even when I am, writing code at that pace, learning new things isn't quite as easy as it used to be. But AI is, infinitely indefatigable. It never gets tired. And AI can teach me how to use a new API or a new library much faster than I could have learned it on my own reading documentation or even using Stack Overflow. So the things that I was getting worse at as I aged, AI makes up for those. And the things that I get better at with experience help cover up for the deficiencies of AI, of its tendency to go off in the wrong direction or get confused or not understand how to use how the project that we're working on fits in to the big picture. So when I was working on JVector, I used GPT-4 at the time to write pieces of JVector, and it was a big help. But as I transitioned from writing that JVector low-level library from scratch, which is a relatively small amount of code, and I moved to integrating that with Cassandra and adding things like BM25 keyword search to Cassandra, uh, AI was much less effective at helping me there because not because the problem was harder. In fact, the problems were easier in some ways, but because the amount of context that the AI needs to understand how to correctly make changes in Cassandra is so much larger and spread out over lots of different places. And so I didn't enjoy writing Cassandra code as much. And I wanted to bring the fun and the productivity because fun and productivity are almost synonymous for me when writing code. And I understand that that's not the same for everyone, but for me, those are almost the same thing. I wanted to bring that to people working on larger code bases with a lot of history, like the Cassandra code base. And so that's where Brokk came from. Is I'm building tools to solve the problems that I had working in this large Java code base.
One interesting, maybe side note, what you said. So I'm also getting older every day, and I also thought recently about productivity and age. And my impression, as my personal experience, or I try to measure it somehow or quantify it at least. And I think we are more productive, but think we are slower. This is, but you are right. What you said with AI is everything is on the right path. So, but just interesting because I also spent some time thinking about that. And maybe at the beginning of Java, I also spent I don't know, 16 hours, maybe even 16 hours writing code. but it was like brute force writing, right? And I was happy that it worked at all at the end, I have to say. And sometimes didn't even knew why it worked, right?
Right. And I saw this recently recently, about a year ago, with a new hire at DataStax. The guy was really smart kid. And I'll call him a kid because at the time he was fresh out of high school. So we hired him as a full-time engineer out of high school. Really, really smart, or we wouldn't have done that. But I watched him work, and he'd get an error, and he'd immediately start typing an attempt to fix the error. And I'm like, hang on, you can't even have read that entire error message yet. How can you possibly know what the right fix is? Slow down and think just a little bit more before you jump to a solution.
And also, what also happened, I can tell you about my experiences. At the beginning, I just wrote just Java classes, and they worked. And now I'm starting differently. I have already an idea how it could look like, and start a little bit with more structure. This is like, productive notes to myself. Maybe I start with Java packages and just then package info maybe or whatever. And then if I write the code, it mostly works. Of course, there are some abstractions are not right or whatever. So I think, and the problem is I could for sure write for 12 hours Java code for now. It is still fun because I get better and better with Java, and Java evolves. And I really enjoy new features. But I say, okay, it is not necessary, because there are other things to do. So what I'm trying to do, I write for 6 hours, then write some documentation, something boring, and then write again Java code. So maybe smarter with my time. So I believe it's also in your case, because I thought about what I did actually at the beginning of Java. I remember there was a project we start of CMS with servlets. I know the prototype worked for 2 days. And I found it recently, and I said, okay, what I actually did, and I think right now I could write it in 1 day, because a lot of if else or whatever, and I will look at this and I say, okay, this is not like, and I was and it actually worked back then, but now I would write less code, and it would even work better, right? So I think that in your case it's the same. You're thinking that 20 years ago you were faster. And it is not the case. It's just but AI is the right thing. I also work with AI all the time. It's more fun. You have to be careful what you're doing, but it's more fun. But I think we have now superpowers with AI, because if you age, you have more experience. And what we can do better, I don't know about you. I suppose we can read code very fast, right? So if I see Java code, in my case, I guess, okay, this works. This is maybe a problem here. And this is very important for AI, because they generate a lot of code very fast. And you have to be capable to read the code and see, is it right or not, right? Apply or reject the entire time. This is, I think, the challenge. And you can only do this if you read enough code, right?
Yes. And what you gave is a good example of the kinds of corrections that I'll need to make with AI, that AI will often write 1,000 lines of densely nested if else, and I'll say, hang on a second, there's a better way to structure this. And I don't know if it's because the training set contains more bad examples than more good examples, because if I tell it, no, structure it this way instead, it can do that, but that's not always its first attempt. So I thought that was interesting.
So I look at Brokk, and it's this very interesting approach. First, what I like, of course, is 100% pure Java, except the models, for we don't know how they are programmed. But the UI is a dark themes swing, but it looks nice. There's a JLama involved, and a little bit Scala is the analysis tool. This Yearn, I think, should be pronounced. And what I think, what Brokk is for me is like, there was a similar story. It was like agentic AI, but and at this particular case, it was 1 year ago. It didn't work. It was Devon or something like this, right?
Yes, they're still around.
Yeah, and but what I learned is you try to. I think context is everything. This is Brokk, right? So with Brokk, it is easy, to find the right context, and then give the context to the AI, and then you get better results. This is my summary. What I try to understand what happens behind the scenes.
Yes, with Brokk, and this will make more sense after you try using it probably. But with Brokk, I feel like I'm a sculptor of the context. So I'm working at a level of abstraction a little bit higher than writing the code myself. I want to make sure that the AI has the correct context to solve the problem without me having to tell it line by line what that solution needs to look like. And so that's how Brokk is designed, is to make it easy to sculpt and shape that context. And the other thing that is a key principle for Brokk is that there's no black boxes. So Brokk is open source, first of all, so it's open in that respect. But also the context that Brokk presents to the AI is always surfaced to you as a human engineer and supervisor as well. So one of the things that's frustrating with most of the other AI tools is they will try to pull in context to help the AI solve your problem, but you don't know what that is. And I think that's partly because they consider that proprietary of how they're trying to solve that problem. But it makes it very frustrating because as a experienced engineer, if the AI is going in the wrong direction, it's almost always because it has the wrong context. But if I can't see what that context is, I can't fix it. So Brokk gives you that. The idea with Brokk is I don't want to make it manual. I want to make it as automatic as possible to pull in the context. But I want you to be able to see what that is so that if those automatic subsystems don't find the right code, then you have the tools to fix that.
Yeah, and what I couldn't find, so what I tried to do, where AI is useful is when you have a spec, and you often have the spec. For instance, I recently have to work with JSON RPC, or if you have whatever spec you have, then you can say, okay, look, this is the spec, and this is the context, and you can ask questions. So in Brokk, can you also add references to documents as well?
Yes, you can add references to documents, and one of the features that I'm a little bit proud of, because I haven't seen anyone else do this, is Brokk can pull in dependencies with basically a single click. So there's an import dependency menu item, and when you open it up for Java, it will give you the option to decompile a jar. And so it gives you autocomplete of all the jars on your class path. And then it will decompile those and pull in the source code of those decompiled Java files into Brokk's native code analysis. So what I found with that is that working with the decompiled code is almost as good as working with the human readable code for the AI. And what that gives you is, in the case of many open source libraries, documentation is an afterthought. So if the documentation is there, often it doesn't have the details of the exact problem you want to solve. And so most of the time, not always, but most of the time, it's more useful for me to use Brokk's dependency decompile. And then I can just say, summarize this library that you just decompiled. And that's a summarization, not in the sense of asking the AI to create a summary. That's a mechanical summarization based on the syntax tree. So that's where that Yearn static analysis tool comes into play. Is I'll do this syntax tree based summary, and then the AI can look at that to understand how to use the API correctly.
This is actually brilliant, I have to say. So this is because what you are saying, I could have Maven with some dependencies, and the AI will use indirectly the source code from the dependencies to learn about the API. Of course, this is very precise description then, because maybe even if you use, Claude or whatever, I saw that you can also use multiple models at the same time with Brokk. So
yes.
So Claude probably has already some knowledge because it's scraped the internet, the GitHub, about the library, and now you get the bytecode is even more, or bytecode, the decompiled bytecode is even more context. And This is unique for Java because Windsurf and Cursor and the others are not doing that. These are like generic tools which are for all languages. And this is what like one of the killer features of Brokk, the first one. Because what I can also do with Cursor, I can add files. But if I don't do this, it searches my entire repository. And if I add files, I have to add the files one by one, which is annoying. And also what I don't like about Cursor and the others is I don't know. I try to clear the chats all the time because I don't know whether it's a good idea to keep everything because I don't have, to proceed with one path. I have several ideas at the same time. So I never know, should I proceed and add another question or is better to clear the chat, and start over? And also the others are pretty aggressive. So what I do is, if you do whatever, you ask a question, they try to modify the code. So I always turn off the agent mode, and I go to manual or ask, because they modify 3 files, and I spent longer to understand what they did. This is the problem. So for me, it's always the first thing, what do you like to achieve? Because what often happens is with AIs, they fix the symptom and not the problem, right? So recently I wrote a small a builder library. So I write lots of Java automation scripts, ZB, and I said, okay, let's use also some AI to have some fun. This tool is just very basic. It just compiles and creates a jar with a manifest, and this is basically it. No external dependencies, and have some unit tests. And one unit test. What I wanted to do is that ZB learns, is this source main Java? Okay, then if it finds source main Java, it assumes the sources are there. If it finds source, it assumes the sources are in the source. And if it finds nothing, it assumes the sources are in the root. And I did some mistake with relative path, and I say fix the unit tests. So on what the AI did, Claude 4, it just, hard-coded source main Java and fixed the test. The test was green, but the problem was not solved. So it was like, this is like, it couldn't, of course, I could describe it a little bit more, but this is like classic. And with Cursor, it already, changed all the files, which was completely wrong. And so I spent more time cleaning up and I mean, by one, understand what happened. And this happens maybe once every 2 days, but this is enough to be annoying. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah. So with Brokk, we've designed it to be, you can control how manual you want that process. And so I found that I develop an intuition over time over which problems are going to be, the AI might go off the rails with, and which ones I need to supervise closely versus which ones it can be more autonomous. So we do have an autonomous mode called the architect mode. And where that's most useful for me is when I have a change that I need to make across the code base, because in a large project, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to edit all the files at once, right? But the architect can manipulate the workspace. It can add and remove files. So it can start making a refactor, and then the compiler says, oh, I've got an error in this method. You changed the source, but now you need to change the caller in these 6 other files that aren't in the workspace. And the architect can add those to the workspace and fix that problem and then move on to the next problem. The other thing you mentioned was about the task history. And is it better to leave your previous interactions in the history or to clear them out? And it's not necessarily obvious which is better. And one of the things that Brokk does to tackle that is it gives you a kind of branching history. It's presented as a linear view, but at any point in that linear history, you can right click and say, start the history from this point, and with the workspace context and with or without that conversation history. So you can try it in multiple paths and undo back to a previous state if it doesn't work out.
What interesting decision, because Brokk is actually not an IDE. It is more like agentic IDE. So is the expectation that it writes the entire code, or you can just open it, works, and then switch to Visual Studio Code? Or what's the idea behind it? What's the typical workflow, or how you use Brokk?
So right now, Well, my goal is to be able to use Brokk for almost everything. But the actual current state is that I probably spend about 20% of my time in IntelliJ and 80% of my time in Brokk. So if I need to make manual edits to the code, then I'll do that in IntelliJ. Brokk is not good for that. But for everything where I describe to the AI the changes I want to make, which is most of my changes, then I'll do that with Brokk.
Mm-hmm. And what are the typical 20%? So what do you have still to do in IntelliJ? So or why you're doing this?
So the what I like to do, you mentioned kind of sketching out a package structure,
mm-hmm.
and that helps the AI. And I'll do something similar for complex problems. Is I'll sketch out a structure and I'll just put in the method bodies to do. And then I'll give that to the AI and say, here's the structure, fill in the details, because I've thought about this. I know what the solution should look like. And if I give it to you just as a problem description, you're going to converge on something that's not optimal. So here's the correct design, just fill it in. More often, what I'll do is I'll just do the data structures. So was it Rob Pike or Brian Kernighan who famously said, if something along the lines of, I don't need to see your algorithms if I can see your data structures, because that will tell me what the algorithms should look like. And that holds true with AI. If I give it the correct data structures, then that's almost always enough to guide it along a good path towards writing that code. And there's some tactical features that Brokk doesn't have. Brokk has fairly good Git support. So, and one of the places that, by the way, that everyone is sleeping on in terms of giving the AI good context is your Git history. And so your code is not just like, it didn't spring into existence in the form it has today. It evolved over time to get to that. And in that evolution is contained a lot of the why. Like, why does this code look like it does today? And what could break if I make changes without understanding that history? And so Brokk has a Git browser, both by file and by commit, and you can right click on those and say, capture this revision or capture the changes to this file, so that you can use that unified diff as context. And so, for instance, very frequently, like, I don't know, 60% of the time, maybe, if I have a regression that I've bisected and I know the problem was introduced in commit X, I can just say capture commit X. And then in Brokk, I'll right click on that commit and say edit the referenced files. So Brokk can read Git commits and anything else that contains paths of files in your Git project and understand how to edit those with a single click. So after doing that, I'll have the unified diff in my workspace and the files that were changed in that diff, but at their current state. But I can also capture their historical state. That's useful occasionally, but less often. So usually I'll have the diff of the change and the current state of the files, and then I can tell the AI this change made such and such a feature break, fix the problem. And that's all I need to do to give it for it to identify the problem. And so I said 60%, that's not nearly 100%, but it's so much faster than going through 10,000 lines of diff by hand that it's worth a try in case I hit that 60% sweet spot.
Even it's really interesting because what you could also do, imagine, I think in your example, there was like a migration to Jackson or something, right? From Java serialization to Jackson. Now imagine we have working application and we decided to migrate to Jackson or to JSONB or whatever. So there's the first commit and the last commit. So would this work that I could just capture, both commits, it's like a boundary, and then ask Brokk, describe the migration. What do you think about this? So the first,
yes.
right?
Yeah, that would absolutely work.
This is the first huge added value. And then the next prompt would be what you would do differently, right? How to improve the migration process. This would be also cool. And then maybe even which files were changed, but unit tests are missing, for instance.
Yes. So this is actually a really good point, because there's a lot of people who see the initial output of AI and that it's not great code, like we discussed earlier. It's kind of the most common style that they see in the training set, which is not good code. And so they're kind of dismissive about AI because of that. And that, we talked about how the role of the human, you are still responsible for your code, whether you're writing that by hand with your keyboard or whether you're writing that with an AI assistant, you're still responsible. So you can clean that up. Whether you clean that up with IntelliJ or you clean that up with Brokk, you can clean that up. But the other thing that people miss is that AI is getting better and better, not just at writing code, but at reviewing code and at proposing tests and cleaning up technical debt, as well as creating technical debt. So part of the reason why, in creating Brokk, there are places where I could probably give you a dozen places where I know there is technical debt that I wish was not there, but it's just not worth the effort right now to clean that up, because in 6 months, O4 or Opus 5 will be able to clean that up for me with very, very little effort. So we've always had to apply the principles, but strike a balance between you ain't going to need it on the one hand, and I want to make my life easier in the future with lower technical debt. And now we have this new aspect to judge of which parts of my problems is AI going to be better at solving in 6 months, and I can wait until then to solve that.
So at the beginning with the AI journey, I just let's generate some code, and what I saw that the code is how Stack Overflow looks like, ancient Java code which no one will write right now. But what I started with back then, system prompt, and I said you are a Java expert, whatever, and you are only allowed to write Java 21 plus code. And then I extended this with, for instance, var. Always use var. Then whatever I didn't like, I put this to the prompt. And right now I have to say the code which generates, it looks like my code, right? So I would say 80%. So sometimes still.
I had a similar experience, almost exactly the same.
Okay.
So Brokk has a style.md document that it will generate it for you automatically based on what it sees in your project. But then you can edit that and check it into Git, and that will be the style guide that the AI uses. And I started off this exact same way, saying, hey, use modern Java, use 21 plus. And that wasn't enough, because it's only a little bit familiar with what's actually in Java 21. But then when I extended it to say use streaming, map, and filter, and use var, and
exactly,
yeah, then it got much better.
So can you add such rules directly to Brokk? So I say, okay, rule, because for instance, cursor, what I don't like is there is one global rules, and then are per project rules, but my rules are everywhere the same. So, and what I wanted to have is a more structure, not a one big file, rather than rule number 1, use vars, number 2, use records and not getters and setters, right? So, and then you can play more, because you can deactivate one rule, activate, and see what happens. And if you have one giant document, it's just harder. So can you add individual rules or markdown files to Brokk, and it will scan and use everything at the same time? That's
a great idea, and I'll put it on my list. But right now we're at the one giant file stage.
Okay, then. But this is, I think, an easy fix, and it's a more a UI problem than an actual problem, because at the end of the day, you have to pass everything. But for experimentation, and unit tests.
And on that theme, one of the things that has been frustrating to me is that Sonnet 4 generally writes cleaner code than Gemini Pro 2.5, but Sonnet 4 is not as good at Java as Gemini Pro 2.5 for whatever reason. and on the Brokk team, an engineer, our web team says, no, Sonnet 4 is way better at React and JavaScript. And so we're totally using Sonnet 4. So I understand that this isn't a global recommendation, and some models are better at some things than others. But I am confident that Gemini Pro 2.5 is better at Java in general. But one of the things that I don't like about it is it will litter the code with unnecessary null checks and all kinds of. It's very, very defensive about how it writes its code, and I've tried really hard to overcome that with prompting, and I can't do it. I could not change its behavior. I think it's very strongly baked into how it was trained. But recently, I added error prone to Brokk and null away. So now it's a compile time error to add unnecessary checks of that nature. And so that makes me very, very happy. And the relevant part for our conversation is the way I added error prone and null away was what we talked about earlier. Is I put it in, I made the change in my build script, and then I turned on architect mode in Brokk, and I said, fix the build. I turned on -w error so that warnings turned into errors, and then I just said, fix the build. And it wasn't zero intervention, but it was very close to zero intervention from that point. So I've never used error prone before in my Java career because there's just a lot of cleanup to do if you're adding it to an existing project. And it's more cleanup than I would want to do by hand. But it's cleanup that is fairly mechanical. It's very mechanical. And so the AI can do that with making very, very few mistakes.
Another question. Have you used a cursor or tried cursor?
I like a year ago.
Because
I try it every once in a while, but I'm not the world's expert on cursor.
No, I just use cursor just to use it and see how it works and to get an understanding. But and also try to find documentation on YouTube and so forth. But comparing to Brokk, for me, seems like cursor is really primitive. So I would say in cursor, you have the chat, you're adding files, and you ask cursor something to do, and you get a diff. It explains everything nicely. But, the Git history or the more sophisticated stuff you're talking about is just not available. And it's also not as well integrated with Java as your AI is. And I think, I never thought about this, but the first time occurs to me that is really added value to get their language-specific context to AIs. And in your idea is brilliant to decompile Java jars. How you got the ideas, actually? Because the idea is brilliant, but it's not obvious, It's just like, you said this, like, of course you have to do this. But for me, it was not that obvious. I mean,
it's kind of part of constraints-driven development. So
okay.
One of my constraints is that I didn't want people to have to integrate Brokk into their build system or into CI. Because that's the kind of heavyweight process that would make me as a developer not want to try the tool. And I've definitely worked with engineers. I'm probably in the 10th percentile, maybe even lower, for expertise with Maven and Gradle and build systems. Like, something about them just really, I hate fighting build systems. And so I've never gotten good at them. So probably most people are less afraid of touching the build system than I am. But that was one of the things that I wanted, was to deliver a tool where you didn't need to touch the build system to use it. And so it uses AI to inspect the build system and propose things like, here is how Brokk can run tests using Gradle W or using MVN. But it doesn't require you to integrate Brokk with those tools. And so I was thinking, how can I get information from the dependencies without that kind of build integration? And so decompiling the dependencies fell out of it.
Yeah, really great idea. And another question is somehow related, because I also was thinking about this. How AI, if your AI tools are changing our code and code structure. So, for instance, I can tell you my experience first, maybe, or you would. What is a better idea? Should you go first, or should I go first? What do you think in this particular case?
Well, I can start. I will say that having AI makes me less scared of problems where I cannot find an elegant solution. Mm-hmm. So in the past, I mean, I don't know. It's like an internal hang up I have, and I'm not every engineer is like this, but I know I'm not the only one like this, where if I can't find an elegant solution, I don't want to write the code at all. It just feels wrong to write inelegant code. And now I'll just say, hey AI, just brute force this. Generate that nest of nested ifs and elses and while loops. I don't care. Let's just get it working, and maybe we refactor this code in a year, and maybe we don't. Let's just power through this because we've got other problems to solve. And so that's kind of liberating for me, because while I still prefer elegant code and clean solutions, I don't get stuck on the problem when I can't find that elegant solution.
Almost the same outcome with complete different motivation. So in my case is if there is some repetitive work, so I have to, I don't know, have a scan for something or try to find or whatever. In the past, I would say, okay, let's be smart, use reflection, annotations, whatever, to make it a little bit more readable still, but more complex, because reflection is complex, dynamic behavior is complex. So it was for me easier, but the machinery was hard. And with AI, what I tend to do is let AI generate very simple Java code, which I would never write because it's too much code, but it's even more readable, but I don't like to write such a code. So what I do a lot right now is like JSON, whatever, like method to JSON, generate a code, and it generates, write a unit test. I look at this, looks right. But back then, I would, for instance, use external library, and sometimes I let the AI just generate the JSON structure inside the method, which is brilliant, right? So I would say this is like almost like a code generator, which is able to translate a complex problem into simple Java code without magic. Oh, okay. So AI eliminates magic in my project. So instead of using complex CDI qualifiers, whatever, I say it's not needed. So we can also go with switch statement or if else. So very back to basics. So my code looks like JDK 1.0 code, right? So no, I mean records and so forth. But from the structure, no magic. This is actually how I'm using AI right now. But it is almost the same what you said right now, but with different motivation, right?
Yes, that's a good point. Is reflection in particular is something that I've moved away from as an engineer because it makes the code opaque to my tooling, and that was true. Now that's true for when your tooling's IntelliJ, and it's also true when your tooling is AI. It's actually a bit less true when your tooling's AI because AI is happy to read through tons of text and just treat it as text. But AI is stronger when you can say, find all the usages of this method and tell me what the invariants are for when I'm refactoring so that I don't break anything. And that's something you can do in Brokk is you can say, show me all the usages. And not only will it give you like the call sites, but it will give you the full source code of each of the call sites in your workspace so that it's visible to the AI. We're talking about, I lost my train of thought. We're talking about reflection and making.
What I just said, that I let AI generate simple code with a little bit more code, but very basic code, and also, and interesting, to get rid of external dependencies.
Yeah, and so you mentioned earlier that I refactored Brokk to use Jackson serialization instead of Java serialization. And so the history there is, this is for when you reopen Brokk, it opens up your workspace the way you left it. And so every time I changed the objects that were backing the workspace, then it would break, and you would open up Brokk and it would have an empty workspace instead of being able to have that forwards compatibility. And I understand that there's ways to do upgrades with Java serialization without breaking things, but it's difficult. And it's much easier with JSON. But
you used Java vectors for serialization or Java classes? Java records. I mean, Java records or Java classes?
Java. Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
But it's a mix. It's a mix, or it was a mix. And so I tried to get AI to upgrade my Java serialization to Jackson using reflection, because that's the cleanest way to do it. And I tried like 3 times over several months with different generations of models. And Gemini 2.5 was not smart enough, and Sonnet 4 was not smart enough, and O3 was almost smart enough, but not quite. And so finally I just said, hey, let's just generate this with DTOs, DTO records that we marshal the Java classes to with no reflection. We'll just brute force it with a big ass file full of DTO records, and that worked. And so I have this 1,200 line DTO file that makes me sad inside, but I never edit it by hand. I just say, hey, AI, update this for the new record or the new field. And I don't really have to.
Mm-hmm. What I also always had to do is to tell AI, don't generate that many unit tests, because the unit tests were like 50 pointless unit tests. So right now it's okay, only generate if there's certain complexity. This also works well, but it is really, I would say this Brokk is really interesting, also way better than suspected. So I from your article I read this. And I say, okay, it is better than Cursor. It goes the right direction. But the Git history, you also mentioned this in your article. But having the context between 2 diffs or 2 tags, this is actually, you could even have this is generate release notes between this and this commit. We'll also do this, of course. We don't have enough time, so I have to reinvite you back about Brokk, of course. So one question is. I have API access to Claude and OpenAI and most of the commercial one. Could I just plug it into Brokk, or what is the idea? So what is the commercial idea behind Brokk? So is it? Yeah.
So there's 2 commercial ideas. One is that if you're running an engineering team, you don't want to have to reimburse engineers for subscribing to different AI vendors yourself. And you probably don't even want to manage OpenAI and Anthropic and Gemini and XAI and maybe even some Mistral. You don't want to manage half a dozen subscriptions yourself either. So one of the pitches is that for enterprises, Brokk gives you a single unified pane of glass to manage your AI API usage, and it gives you useful features like session sync and session sharing for your team to use as they collaborate. But for an individual, I mentioned it's open source. I'm not, if that doesn't add value for you, having Brokk manage those API keys for you and subscriptions. And by the way, one of the cool things about Brokk is that by having us manage those subscriptions, we are at the top tier of rate limits for all of the vendors, and so there's a big difference between for Gemini, not so much. They're very generous with their base tier rate limit, but for OpenAI, there's a very big difference in how many O3 calls you can make per minute, or how many tokens you can push through it per minute. And so one
Claude
of the
is
features
also brutal. I have commercial support, but Claude, I get throttled a lot with Claude.
Yeah. Even everyone gets throttled a lot with Claude. That's another thing I don't like about Anthropic. But one of the things that's coming to Brokk, it's behind a feature flag right now, but it's coming in a release soon, is an upgrade agent. And I wrote this to help with the error-prone and null-away migrations. And what it does is it basically does, instead of working with a single workspace at a time where you've pulled different pieces of code in that are relevant to your problem, the upgrade agent works at a file level. And it works in a massively parallel level at a file level. So it will go through, the default is 200 files at a time, sending off requests in parallel to apply your instructions to each of those files in parallel. So that can be a massive, massive speed up over doing it one file at a time, but only if you have the rate limit that allows you to do 200 at a time. But coming back to your question of, hey, if I do want to manage those keys myself, can I do that? The answer is yes. So Brokk works with Light LLM to provide a unified API to the different vendors. So we host our own that's behind the gate of your Brokk API key. But you can run Light LLM on your own machine with your own keys. And there's a setting in Brokk that says use Light LLM on localhost. And then you're basically off to the races. There's a markdown file in the docs directory of the source checkout that explains how to set this up, because there's a couple pieces of metadata that Brokk wants the models to have that aren't default. So you will need to do a little bit of annotation for each model that you want to use to add that metadata. And the other thing is that Brokk hard codes using Gemini Flash Lite for things like suggesting commit messages and summarizing your changes into history entries. So you'll need to name one of your models Gemini Flash Lite, even if it's not actually backed by Gemini. You can name it whatever you want and have it backed by whatever you want. But other than that, you can totally use your own models, and even if they're running on Olama or something locally, which I don't recommend because the models that you can run locally are not as smart and not as fast. But you can totally do it if you want to.
It was more. This is one of the first questions in the enterprise project, right? So there are companies which are not allowed to go directly to Anthropic or OpenAI. They sometimes are allowed to go, to Azure AI and indirectly use OpenAI, or even have own portals. And if you can set up your own model, it's a more trust. So, and let's say in my case, it's not like my goal is to save time, right? So, and I have already the keys. So if I have the keys and I will pay you, is there any added value for me as individual, because, is there any, how to call it? Is there any difference between the commercial version and the open source, which I download, or more services around for me as an individual singleton?
If you're a power user and you're fine, managing your own keys, and then right now, this answer may change in the future, but right now, not really. Just point Brokk to your own Light LLM. Go ahead and do that, and you'll get basically the same experience.
Mm-hmm. And if I don't like to use my own keys because I get throttled or whatever, how this experience would look like? Can I have a yearly subscription or monthly, or how this is working? So let's say I don't like to use my own keys, which maybe is even true in my case, because in Cursor I also use whatever Cursor suggests me, because I would like to test the Cursor experience and not my API access. So let's say I don't like just to use Brokk, everything from Brokk. So how this would look like.
So one of the things that I don't like about the experience of using other tools is that their pricing is, I'm going to overgeneralize. I'm sure there's exceptions, but all of the popular examples I can think of, their pricing is based on requests. Mm-hmm. And that sets up perverse incentives when you're using AI, because if you're paying per request, and you can see this in the Cursor Reddit forums, people are talking about how they try to pack the most possible into a single request because that's what they're paying for. but that's not going to get you the best response from the model.
Yeah.
The model is going to respond better if you give it relevant information for a single problem and not try to pack 8 problems into that one request. So the incentives of vendors and users are not aligned, and I don't like that, and I didn't want that for Brokk. So the way it currently works is there's a $20 a month subscription for Brokk, and that gives you $20 of credit towards any of the vendors, with the exception of, like, there's a handful of models: Grok 3 Mini, DeepSeek V3, Flash 2.0. These are free, like whether you're paying or not. So you can use Brokk. I guess that's another reason that you might want to use the Brokk API, is that you get these base or lower level models for free.
Which is already a huge added value, because the inference is not free, right? So the models are open source, but the inference usually you have to pay for compute costs.
I basically want people to be able to try Brokk even if they're allergic to paying me, because I hope to convince them that it's good enough to pay for after they try it. And so when you sign up for Brokk, you get a $5 credit for the advanced models that aren't free. But if you exhaust that credit, you can keep using the free models indefinitely. But after you exhaust that $20 of credit per month, then you can buy additional credits that don't expire. And right now during beta, we're not charging any markup. So what you pay us is exactly what we're paying the model vendors. The plan is down the road to charge a small markup for each request, but to keep the price based on what we're paying the vendors. So O3 will be more expensive than O4 Mini, and Opus 4 will be more expensive than O3. And so that way, hey, if you think it's worth paying for Opus 4, knock yourself out. Make as many Opus 4 requests as you're willing to pay for. I don't want to try to make that decision for you by changing the pricing model.
So the $20 per month, will the expire, or will the next month?
Right. The $20 a month does expire, but it's pretty easy to go through $20 a month of credit when you're using Gemini 2.5, when you're using Sonnet 4, when you're using O3.
Do you have yearly subscriptions?
As of right now, we don't.
This is one improvement. I would.
Yeah,
suggest.
we should. That makes it stickier, and I will go do that next week.
Then I will subscribe, because the problem with me is you get a monthly invoice, and
Yes.
I have to pass every month X invoices to my bookkeeping, and this is a lot of overhead. And yearly subscriptions are way easier. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, this is really, you have to do this, and the markup is just mandatory. You have to be, you cannot just pass through the costs, I would say. And another thing which I'm interested in, the last one as a cliffhanger. So let's.
Sorry, I'm writing it down.
Okay, write down first.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Let's say we would write as a Java library. Let's say what we can do, and Twitter API, right? So what a typical workflow with Brokk would look like? Will I start with architect mode first, or how you will tackle that? Because what I will do is, let's say Twitter or Blue Sky has already an API. So let's say Blue Sky, because there's actually an API. So there's API document, or GitHub. We create a GitHub API, even better. GitHub API, there's a REST API, well documented, and we can point to it. So I would start with the context. So I will add all the APIs and so forth, and then I'm lazy, so I will briefly start with a simple prompt and see what happens, right? So this would be my idea, and then refine on that. Maybe completely delete the first attempts and start over with more refined prompt and see what happens. And what do you say? How you will tackle?
Yeah. So if it's a small enough problem, GitHub API is probably not small enough.
Commits.
depending on how much surface area you want to cover. If it's a small enough problem, I'll give the spec and I'll just push the code button. So the code button's not going to manipulate the workspace except to add new files. But the code button still gets the edit compile results loop. So after it makes its changes, Brokk will compile what it did, and by default, the default action is to run any tests that are in the workspace. There's a button in the settings that you can say run all the tests no matter what. For most projects, that's too slow, but it is an option if you want it. But the default is to run just the tests in the workspace. So Brokk will run the tests, and any errors it will give back to the AI and say, here's the errors, now fix them. And this happens completely automatically. I've just clicked code a single time, and I'm watching the AI fix problems that the compiler and the test suite are coming back with. So for a small enough problem, I'll just do that. If it's a larger problem, what I would do is I would take the spec, and then I would click the ask button, and I would say, write me a plan to build this incrementally while keeping the build green. So give me steps that I can do one at a time that are self-contained and that I can do without breaking other things in my project. And depending on, if I'm just starting this from scratch, then that's all I'll need. But assuming that I'm building something into an existing project and I'm changing something that exists instead of creating something completely new, then I'll use Brokk's tools like Deep Scan to help me find appropriate context to pull in alongside that spec, so that the AI can see like what might I need to worry about potentially breaking. And then I'll review that plan that the model comes back with, and usually what happens is it will propose something suboptimal. It won't know about something. So I'll add that extra information to the workspace, and I'll say, here's the problem I see. Give me a revised plan, or simplify this part, or combine these steps. And then when we get to a plan that I approve of, then I'll clear the history, and I'll give that plan to the architect, and I'll say, have the code agent follow this plan, but do it a step at a time and break it down by those steps instead of telling it to do it all at once.
So the architect is actually tech lead, and the ask button is the architect, almost, right?
Yeah, that's a little bit of so the reason is that once you click architect, it's going to go off and do its thing.
Okay.
And we're adding a tool for the architect to use, an ask the human tool. So it can pop up a dialogue and say, I'm not sure what to do here. What's your guidance? We don't have that yet. So my workaround is to use ask to make sure that I'm on board with the plan before I turn architect loose on it and let it do it autonomously.
This is actually really interesting. So in larger project, I will ask first, generate a plan, pass over to architect, refine, and the architect will autonomously build something. And then I can just review with smaller prompts and refine my solution until I'm satisfied.
Right.
What means it is also my opinion that AI is actually absolutely unusable for junior programmers, right? Except they are really disciplined to ask a lot of questions and never generate code too early. Otherwise, this is after 3 generation steps is completely pointless.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are definitely people who think AI is more useful for juniors than for seniors, and I think those people are not very experienced using AI. Mm-hmm. I don't know how else to put it. Or maybe there's problem domains where that's true that are not true in the problem domain of Java code bases that I'm used to. But we have a summer intern at Brokk, and he is a college junior. He's a smart kid. But it's very slow going for him. And he's done half a dozen PRs, and none of them have been close to the right. Well, none of them have been the right thing initially. Some of them have been close. I won't say none of them have been close. But yeah, even with AI helping him, there's definitely a lot of experience missing. Whereas I have 2 other engineers on the team who have used like tab completion with Copilot in the past, but they've never really done large scale creating instructions for AI to write code in your project before joining Brokk. And they picked it up like that. I would say part of it is probably because the experience of managing AI or supervising AI is very similar to supervising a junior intern or programmer on your team. And most senior engineers have some experience with that. So yeah, I think you're right. And I'm very curious to see how my intern progresses. He just finished his first week at Brokk. So I'm very curious to see how quickly that learning curve accelerates. But you're 100% right that the senior engineers get more out of AI faster.
Yeah. And when you started with Brokk, because it is really advanced tool. So when was, how old is Brokk?
The first commit in the Git history is like January 27th, something like that.
Wow.
So I got it. One of my first goals was to get it to be where it could be self-editing. So I wanted to start dogfooding, writing Brokk with Brokk as soon as possible. And I think 0.2 was where it got to that point fairly early on in February.
So you built Brokk with Brokk.
Absolutely.
I have to re-invite you back because I'm afraid to ask any more questions. Because if you like, I will really like to talk Brokk under the hood.
That would be great, and that will give you a chance to try out the new Brokk 0.10 release, which just came out today.
Exactly, and maybe there's some touches of JVector inside. Who knows? A little bit of
not yet, and we can talk about why not.
Why not? Exactly.
Because you would. I think just about everyone uses vector search like JVector as part of pulling in context from your instructions, and Brokk does not, and that seems weird given that I wrote one of these engines, and I would love to talk about why that is.
Yeah, maybe you are bored with JVector, so okay, now try something else, right?
There's technical reasons beyond that for sure.
Perfect. Where people can find you and Brokk on the internet?
Brokk.ai, and I'm on Twitter as Spiced, SPYCED.
Perfect. Thank you, and see you next time.
Thanks again, Adam.